It started the same way most stupid neighbor wars do, with something so small you almost laugh about it at first. Except you can't laugh when someone keeps stealing your mail. The first time it happened, I thought maybe the wind caught it or the postman dropped it. The second time, I saw footprints leading from my mailbox across the grass toward Karen's house, the kind of expensive floral slippers only she wore when she strutted around the cul-de-sac pretending to inspect everyone's yards for HOA compliance. I didn't confront her then. That's the trick with people like Karen. They thrive on the reaction. They feed on it. So I waited, calm on the outside, boiling on the inside. Every letter that went missing felt like an itch I couldn't scratch, and the itch turned into obsession. I started watching patterns. She came out every morning at exactly 7:15 to water her fake lavender plants, waved like a politician, and always managed to check my mailbox before going back inside. I installed a discreet camera inside a fake birdhouse across the street, angled just right to catch the crime. And sure enough, the footage confirmed what I already knew. Karen, my self-appointed neighborhood guardian, was taking my mail. I live in a quiet gated community where HOA rules are treated like scripture. Karen wasn't just a member of the HOA, she was its self-declared enforcer. She loved her laminated binder of bylaws more than her husband, I think. She once fined a man for painting his mailbox post the wrong shade of brown and bragged about it at the annual block party. She lived for control, and taking my mail gave her a kind of twisted satisfaction. Maybe she thought she was catching me in a rule violation, or maybe she was just bored. But I wasn't about to let her keep getting away with it. So I made a plan, not one born of anger, but of artistry. Before that, though, I wanted to understand her motive. I played nice. I waved at her, complimented her garden gnome collection, even offered her a jar of my homemade honey. She took it with suspicion, sniffed it, and said, "We don't usually eat unregulated produce." That one line told me everything. Karen's whole world revolved around the illusion of regulation, control, hierarchy. And me? I was the quiet guy who built his own porch swing and didn't show up to HOA meetings. That offended her. I represented independence, the one thing she couldn't find. That's why she targeted me. A week later, a package I'd been waiting for, a rare woodworking chisel from Vermont, vanished from my mailbox. I checked my camera, and there she was again, in her pastel pink robe, tucking my box under her arm like it was a casserole dish. I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I saved the footage and went to the post office to report it. The clerk sighed. "We'll investigate," he said, in the same tone you use when you promise a kid the tooth fairy is real. So that was useless. The police wouldn't care either unless it was substantial value. I needed another approach. Something she'd understand on a primal level. Fear. Embarrassment. The kind of thing that sticks to a person's memory every time they look at your mailbox. That's when I thought of the fake snake. My brother works in props for local theater productions. He once brought over a rubber snake so realistic it made my dog refuse to go outside for 2 days. The thing was heavy, glossy, with tiny painted scales and a half-open mouth. Perfect. I asked if I could borrow it. "You doing a prank?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. I spent the next day preparing like I was setting a stage trap. I coiled the snake neatly inside the mailbox, facing outward, just enough so when someone opened the lid, it looked like it was mid-lunge. I also installed a motion-triggered GoPro just to make sure I didn't miss her reaction. Because this wasn't just about revenge, it was about documentation. Karen loved documentation. She used it to bully everyone else. Now it was my turn. The morning of the setup, I left a decoy envelope poking out, labeled HOA response. I knew she wouldn't resist. At 7:16, right on cue, she tottered down her driveway, robe tied, coffee mug in hand. She looked both ways like she was crossing a highway, and then opened my mailbox. The next 3 seconds were pure gold. The camera caught every frame, her shriek, the mug flying into the air, the robe flaring open, and her sprinting backward into her own flower bed. The best part? She tried to kick at the snake, which only made it bounce toward her. She screamed again, and fell backward onto her hydrangeas. I swear, if there had been an audience, I would have gotten a standing ovation. I expected her to hide in humiliation after that, maybe even apologize. But Karen wasn't built that way. She stormed up my porch later that afternoon, hair still frizzed, robe swapped for a blazer like she was heading into battle. "Do you realize how dangerous that was?" she snapped. "You could have caused me serious harm." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Only if you were breaking federal law by opening someone else's mail." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I was checking for HOA violations," she said. "Mailboxes are regulated property." I almost admired her audacity. Almost. "Pretty sure the USPS disagrees," I replied, calm as a lake. Then I handed her a flash drive with the footage. "You might want to keep this before someone else does." That hit her. She hesitated, glared, and walked off muttering something about reviewing the footage for context. For 2 days things were quiet. Too quiet. The neighborhood grapevine buzzed. Someone said Karen had been spotted arguing with the HOA president outside the clubhouse. Someone else said she'd filed a harassment claim. I didn't care. I had the high ground and the footage. Then, 3 nights later, my mailbox was smashed. Bent metal, door hanging open, snake missing. The HOA newsletter came out the next day with a passive-aggressive note. All residents are reminded to maintain standard mailbox appearances and report any wildlife issues to HOA safety. Wildlife issues. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. She couldn't admit what happened, but she couldn't let it go either. That's when I decided to escalate. Slowly, carefully, the way she did. I started sending official-looking letters addressed to myself, fake notices stamped confidential, HOA legal review, and code compliance records. Every morning, I'd check the mailbox in plain view of her window, open one, and nod seriously. I made sure she saw. Then I'd pretend to call someone and whisper angrily. She couldn't resist curiosity. It was her fatal flaw. Sure enough, she began snooping again, this time from behind her blinds. The next phase was psychological. I printed a few flyers with my own version of HOA rules. Article 6, Section 9. Tampering with private property results in immediate expulsion. I pinned one near the community board and signed it anonymously as concerned member. Within hours, I heard her yelling at her husband about illegitimate governance. But this wasn't just mischief anymore, it was chess. I could tell she was preparing her next move, and I knew from experience that when Karen felt cornered, she didn't back down, she lashed out. And as satisfying as it was to see her panic, I couldn't shake the feeling she was about to do something much worse than steal my mail. Because people like her? They never lose gracefully. They make sure everyone else suffers when they fall. The morning after Karen's flowerbed meltdown, I woke up to a crisp silence that felt suspicious. No HOA bulletin, no email warnings, not even her usual passive-aggressive texts about community harmony. For a moment, I almost thought she'd taken the humiliation as a lesson and decided to retreat. Then I stepped outside and saw the note taped to my front door. It was typed, printed, and signed HOA Enforcement Committee. Except there was no HOA committee for enforcement. Karen had made that up months ago when she wanted to fine people faster. The letter accused me of staging a hazardous trap within common property boundaries. It claimed I endangered resident welfare and community morale. I almost laughed, but the tone was too familiar. Karen had gone full bureaucratic villain. She was weaponizing paperwork again. The thing about people like her is that they think bureaucracy is a sword. If they write enough words in Times New Roman, they can make anything true. But I wasn't going to let her win on paper. I drafted my own response, cold, polite, and surgical. "Dear HOA representative," I began, "thank you for your concern regarding mailbox wildlife. I appreciate the reminder that tampering with mailboxes is a federal offense. I have reported the theft to the United States Postal Inspection Service. Should any additional footage be required, I will gladly provide it. Then I printed 2 copies, one for her mailbox, one pinned to the HOA board. I didn't even need to sign it. She'd know exactly who it came from. For the next few days, she avoided me completely. Her curtains stayed drawn, and her morning watering ritual stopped. But I could sense something brewing. When Karen went quiet, it meant she was scheming. And sure enough, on the 4th morning, a white SUV with an HOA logo on the side rolled into the cul-de-sac. A man in a khaki jacket stepped out, clipboard in hand. I watched from my porch, coffee in one hand, phone camera in the other. Karen trailed behind him like a proud prosecutor escorting a witness. The man introduced himself as Mark from Community Standards Oversight. That title didn't exist either. He started listing imaginary infractions: improper lawn edging, non-regulation mailbox decoration, potential safety hazard. Karen stood beside him, nodding like she was on a courtroom TV show. I let him finish, then said, "Mark, right? Mind showing me your credentials?" He blinked, then fished a laminated card out of his pocket. I looked closely. It was a laminated library card with HOA written in Sharpie across the bottom. I couldn't hold back my grin. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. Karen's face went crimson. She barked, "This is official HOA business." I said, "Then you'll have no problem if I call the police to verify." Mark paled, mumbled something about being a volunteer, and got back in his SUV. Karen tried to save face, shouting, "This isn't over." But it already was. The whole neighborhood saw the show. By noon, half the block was laughing about Sheriff Karen and Deputy Clipboard. Still, I knew embarrassment alone wouldn't stop her. If anything, it would make her more desperate. The next day, a letter appeared in everyone's mailbox, an urgent HOA notice about unapproved wildlife pranks and potential rabies hazards. It was pure comedy. The way she phrased it made it sound like I'd unleashed a snake infestation on purpose. But underneath the humor, I sensed danger. She was escalating from petty power plays to full-blown reputation warfare. I noticed 2 of my neighbors acting colder than usual, whispering when I passed. Karen had begun her smear campaign. I heard from a friend across the street that she was telling people I'd planted traps to harm her. Another said she'd threatened to sue me for emotional distress. That was her style: manipulate, exaggerate, and weaponize sympathy. She wasn't going to beat me with reason, she'd try to drown me in gossip. I wasn't going to play defense. I needed a counterpunch that didn't look like one. So I turned the narrative against her. I printed flyers for a neighborhood mailbox safety initiative and delivered them door to door. The flyers thanked residents for vigilance, referenced recent mail thefts, and offered to install small cameras near mailboxes to improve security. I didn't name names, but the implication was obvious. By sunset, half the cul-de-sac was buzzing with talk about mail theft. Karen's empire ran on reputation, and her reputation had just been cracked open. That evening, she marched across my lawn again, shaking one of my flyers. "You're spreading lies about me," she hissed. I said calmly, "I didn't mention you, Karen. But if you're feeling guilty, that's between you and your conscience." She stepped closer, voice trembling with fury. "You think you're clever, but you have no idea who you're dealing with." I smiled. "Oh, I think I do. You're the kind of person who thinks stealing mail is a civic duty." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "You're going to regret this." Then she stormed off, nearly tripping on her own curb. I didn't regret it. I savored it. That night, though, something unexpected happened. Around midnight, I heard my motion light click on. I peeked through the blinds and saw someone crouched by my mailbox. I grabbed my phone, zoomed the camera, and caught the outline of her floral pajamas. She was back, sneaking around like a cartoon burglar. I hit record, but before I could step outside, she noticed the light and bolted. I checked the mailbox in the morning. She'd smeared something sticky on the inside. Honey. My own honey. She'd taken the jar I gave her weeks ago and dumped it inside. I laughed out loud. It was so childish I almost admired the creativity. But I wasn't going to let her one-up me. Two could play that game. I cleaned it out, added a fresh coat of wax polish, and replaced the fake snake with something even better. A small Bluetooth speaker wired to play a rattling hiss whenever the lid opened. It was subtle, quick, and terrifying. And just like before, I left a decoy envelope waiting. At 7:15 the next morning, I sat behind my window, phone ready. She approached cautiously this time, like she was defusing a bomb. She lifted the lid and the hiss blasted out. She jumped back, screamed, and dropped her coffee again. But this time, she didn't run. She spun toward my house, shaking with rage, and started shouting. You think this is funny? I'm calling the HOA right now. I stepped outside, keeping my tone calm. Karen, I've told you before, stop touching my mailbox. You can't prove anything, she snapped. Actually, I can, I said, pointing toward the fake birdhouse camera. You're being recorded every time. Her face froze. Then she screamed, You can't record me. That's illegal, I said, not when you're committing a crime on my property. She looked like she was about to explode. I'm going to have your cameras removed, she yelled. Good luck, I said. They're all registered under federal property protection. That was a lie, of course, but it sounded official enough to make her twitch. She stomped away, muttering something about getting a legal order. I watched her go, feeling both triumphant and uneasy. Because while I had won the skirmish, I could see the desperation growing in her like a storm cloud. She wasn't done. 2 days later, I got an envelope in my mailbox stamped, HOA Legal Department. Inside was a formal-looking letter accusing me of installing unapproved surveillance devices. It demanded immediate removal or I'd face a $500 fine. But the kicker? The letterhead had a typo. Homeowner's assignation. She'd spelled it wrong. Classic Karen. I decided to frame it instead of responding. But that night, I noticed something worse. My security footage was missing. Every clip from the last 2 days, gone. I checked the SD card. It had been wiped clean. The only footage left was from the night before the letter arrived, when a shadowy figure, short, robe-like silhouette, was fiddling near the birdhouse. She'd done it. She'd crossed the line from harassment to sabotage. And this time, I wasn't laughing. I went to the HOA president's house the next morning, a quiet retired man named Robert who spent most of his time golfing. He looked exhausted as soon as I mentioned Karen's name. She's been filing complaints against half the neighborhood, he sighed. But she's technically not breaking any HOA rules by existing. I handed him the fake legal letter. Maybe this is. He read it, blinked, and said, That's not from us. Then he rubbed his temples. I'll talk to her. I could tell he didn't want to, but the forged letter forced his hand. That afternoon, I saw him knock on Karen's door. The conversation looked heated. She gestured wildly. He stayed calm. Then he left. She stood there on her porch for a long time, motionless, staring at my house. It wasn't victory I felt then. It was something colder. Because I realized she wasn't embarrassed or defeated, she was plotting her comeback. And if I knew Karen, it was going to be spectacularly stupid and dangerously personal. 2 mornings passed without any sign of Karen, and that was almost worse than her yelling. Her silence was never peace, it was plotting. I knew that by now. The cul-de-sac had gone still, and the gossip line seemed to pause too, like everyone sensed an incoming storm. On the 3rd morning, I noticed something off. My mailbox flag was up, even though I hadn't sent any mail. Inside was a single envelope, no return address, but my name printed neatly in block letters. The handwriting was shaky, deliberate, and unmistakably Karen's. Inside was a note that said, Enjoy your privacy while you can. No signature. No explanation. Just that one sentence. I almost laughed. Almost. But something about the phrasing, the cold precision of it, felt different. It wasn't her usual petty tone. It was a promise, or maybe a warning. Either way, I knew she wasn't done trying to reassert her little kingdom of control. Later that day, I noticed a new sign near the HOA bulletin board. It was laminated, of course, and titled Community Safety Update. It warned about residents engaging in unauthorized surveillance and use of mechanical and auditory deterrents creating noise disturbances. It didn't name me, but it might as well have. Karen was good at this, framing herself as the victim while turning others into villains through suggestion and fear. I took a photo of it and smiled to myself. She'd declared war through signage. Cute. But the escalation came faster than I expected. Around dusk that evening, while I was sanding a set of cabinet doors in the garage, I heard a loud metallic crash. It wasn't the normal sound of a trash can tipping, it was sharper, heavier. I stepped outside and my stomach tightened. My mailbox was lying face down on the sidewalk, post snapped clean off. A baseball bat leaned nearby. There were no footprints visible in the fading light, but there was one clue: bright pink nail polish on the bat handle, chipped at the edges. Karen's color. I took a slow breath, pulled out my phone, and snapped photos from every angle. I could have called the police, but honestly, I wanted her to dig herself deeper. She always did. The next morning, I installed a brand new metal mailbox, reinforced, bolted into concrete, designed for exactly this kind of nonsense. And this time, I added another layer, a small motion-triggered sprinkler system camouflaged near the base. It wouldn't hurt her, just drench her if she tried again. The setup was simple but elegant. A hose connection hidden under the mulch, pressure sensor tied to a battery unit, and a camera mounted in a nearby planter. By 7:15, everything was armed. Sure enough, the next morning, I caught her in action. The camera feed showed her tiptoeing across my driveway in yoga pants and a hoodie, thinking she was stealthy. She crouched down, probably planning to inspect the new mailbox for compliance, and the sprinkler burst to life, hitting her square in the face. She screamed like she'd been shot, scrambled backward, and fell into the gutter. I nearly spit out my coffee watching the replay. The best part was the look on her face when she saw me watching through the window. She realized instantly that I'd set her up again. I waved politely. She gave me a death glare and stormed back home, dripping and furious. I figured that would finally teach her something. But with Karen, humiliation didn't end the battle, it multiplied it. That afternoon, I came home to find a notice pinned to my front door, again printed under the fake HOA Enforcement Committee name. It stated that deliberate water hazards violated Section 8B of the neighborhood safety rules. I didn't even bother responding this time. Instead, I printed a second letter of my own, very official-looking, from the Postal Property Integrity Task Force, warning residents against tampering with federally protected mail infrastructure. I stamped it with a red notice mark and taped it to the HOA board right above her sign. Within hours, I heard two neighbors arguing about which was real. That was the beauty of bureaucracy. You could drown a liar with more paperwork. By the end of the week, the tension had become neighborhood entertainment. Kids rode by on bikes whispering about Snake Guy, and parents peeked out windows pretending not to watch. Karen's husband, Tom, a tired accountant who always looked 2 seconds away from an apology, started avoiding eye contact entirely. One afternoon, he stopped me while taking out the trash. "Look," he said, his voice low, "I know this whole thing's gotten out of hand. Can we just de-escalate?" I almost felt sorry for him. "I tried," I said. "She keeps crossing lines." He rubbed his forehead. "She's just stressed. Ever since the HOA vote thing. That caught my attention." "What vote thing?" He froze, realizing he'd said too much. "Forget it," he muttered, retreating. But I didn't forget. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the HOA website and, sure enough, there was a recent bylaw vote about leadership restructuring. Karen had been trying to get herself officially elected HOA president, but the board had rejected the motion due to procedural irregularities. Translation: she tried to rig it. The timing matched when she started targeting me again. This wasn't just about mail anymore, it was about power. She needed an enemy to rally the neighborhood around, and I was convenient. I decided to pull the rug out from under her. The next morning, I went to the HOA president, Robert, again. I showed him the smashed mailbox photos, the fake letters, the sign, and even the honey incident. This time, he didn't dismiss it. He sighed, then said, "You know, if we officially fine her for misconduct, she'll appeal and drag everyone into meetings for months." I smiled. "Then let's not fine her. Let's expose her." He frowned, but after a long pause, nodded. We hatched a quiet plan. Robert would call a special HOA safety meeting, open to all residents, to discuss recent concerns about mail security. Karen, naturally, would attend. She never missed a chance to play authority. I'd provide the footage. When the day came, the meeting started like a sitcom. Karen strutted in with her clipboard and a smug smile, ready to perform. She took the front seat, crossed her legs, and whispered to a neighbor about safety enforcement. Then Robert began. "We've had several incidents of mail theft in the neighborhood," he said evenly. "We believe it's important to share the facts." He clicked the remote and the first clip played. The snake scare, then the honey trap, then the sprinkler ambush. Gasps filled the room. Karen's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The final clip showed her lifting the bat, hesitating, and then smashing my old mailbox. When the lights came back on, everyone was staring at her. She tried to recover. "That footage is edited," she sputtered. "He's harassing me." But Robert cut her off. "Karen, you filed a false legal notice under the HOA's name. That's identity fraud. You also vandalized private property. Do you have anything to say?" For once, she had nothing. She gathered her purse, muttered something about lawyers, and fled the room. The silence she left behind was thick and electric. One neighbor whispered, "I knew it." Another chuckled. I stayed quiet. Victory didn't need applause, it just needed finality. Robert turned to me and said, "We'll handle her. You've done enough." That evening, I expected retaliation. I double-checked my cameras, my sprinklers, even the locks on my gate. But nothing happened. Her house was dark, blinds drawn. Days passed, then weeks. The neighborhood calmed down. Mail started arriving again. For the first time in months, peace returned. But the thing about peace is, it's fragile when you've been living in a war zone. One evening, just as I began to relax, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a small cardboard box sitting on the porch. No markings, no address, just my name in block letters again. My chest tightened. I picked it up carefully and opened it. Inside was the fake snake. Coiled neatly, the same one she'd thrown away after the first prank. Except this time, there was a note tied around its neck. Round 2. I froze, staring at it. Part of me wanted to laugh. It was so predictably childish. But another part of me realized what it meant. Karen wasn't defeated. She was regrouping. That night, my camera caught her silhouette again, standing at the edge of my driveway, arms folded, just watching. She didn't move for a full minute. She didn't yell, didn't approach. Just watched, like a general surveying the battlefield she'd lost but planned to reclaim. I stood by the window, lights off, matching her silence. Because if she wanted another round, she was going to get one. But this time, I wasn't just defending my mailbox. I was defending my sanity. And I was going to end it once and for all. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every sound outside made me glance at the window, expecting to see her silhouette again. My phone notifications from the camera system became a kind of lullaby. Ping, motion detected, just a passing cat, ping, a car's headlights, but each one spiked my heart rate like I was living in a thriller. The next morning, I walked to the mailbox expecting damage, but it stood untouched. The fake snake was still on my workbench inside. Maybe she was bluffing. Maybe that note, round 2, was just her way of clawing back some sense of control after public humiliation. But then, around mid-morning, I noticed something stranger. A white van parked across from my driveway. No logos, tinted windows, engine off. It sat there all day. No one got in or out. When I stepped outside to check my mail, the driver's window rolled up slowly, like whoever was inside didn't want to be seen. That's when I realized Karen had moved from personal harassment to outsourcing it. By evening, the van was still there. I took a photo of its plate number and went about my usual routine, watering plants, feeding the dog, pretending not to care. Then I called Robert, the HOA president. "You didn't hire any maintenance workers, right?" I asked. "No," he said. "Why?" I told him about the van. He sighed. "I'll send a community alert just in case. But you and I both know who's behind this." I did. The pattern was too neat, too performative. Karen was trying to spook me, make me paranoid. And to be fair, it was working. But fear can be productive when you turn it into focus. So I got to work. That night, I adjusted all my cameras for wide coverage, including one mounted on my neighbor's fence with their permission. I added an LED motion light near the mailbox post, the kind that floods the street like a stadium. Then I placed the fake snake back inside, this time with a little upgrade, a pressure sensor wired to trigger the sprinklers, the hiss sound, and a short recording of my voice saying, "Smile for the camera." It was petty. It was theatrical. It was perfect. At 11:47 p.m., the motion alert buzzed. The footage showed a shadow moving near the mailbox, tall, not Karen's height. A man. He was trying to pry open the lid using pliers. The moment the lid lifted, the hiss and my recorded voice went off together, followed by a soaking burst from the sprinklers. He screamed, dropped the pliers, and ran straight into the glare of my floodlight. The camera caught his face for a split second. Tom. Karen's husband. That's when I finally understood the message of round 2. She wasn't going to risk herself anymore. She'd sent him to do her dirty work. I didn't call the police that night. Instead, I printed the photo from the footage, placed it in an envelope, and slipped it into her mailbox before dawn. No note. Just the image. When she checked her mail that morning, I watched from my porch, coffee in hand. She froze, staring at the photo, then looked straight at my house. Her expression wasn't fury. It was something colder, like calculation. She turned and walked inside without a word. That afternoon, Tom knocked on my door. He looked like a man carrying a confession he didn't want to make. "She made me do it," he said flatly before I even spoke. "She said you were spying on us. Said you had hidden cameras pointed at our windows." His voice cracked. "I didn't know she meant to break anything. I thought I was. I don't know, checking." I let him talk. It wasn't his fault, not really. Karen had a way of bending people around her obsessions. "Tom," I said quietly, "you need to stop covering for her. She's going to get worse." He looked down. "You don't know her when she's angry." "Actually," I said, "I think I do." He left without another word. For a few days it went quiet again. No van, no notes, no midnight visitors. I almost started to believe it was over. Until Saturday morning, when I found a new notice taped to my front gate. This time on official HOA letterhead. Real letterhead. It was signed by Robert. My stomach sank. The notice claimed I'd violated Section 10A, unauthorized security installations visible from public roadways. A $250 fine. I called Robert immediately. "What is this?" He sounded groggy. "What are you talking about?" "You fined me," I said, "for my cameras." He paused. "I didn't sign anything like that." My heart dropped. Then someone forged it again. He cursed softly. Karen must have gotten access to the template files. "I'll handle it." But before he could, I saw a group of neighbors gathering near my driveway, reading the notice. Karen was among them, arms crossed, pretending to be concerned. "It's a shame," she said loudly enough for me to hear. He was such a nice neighbor before all this security paranoia. That was it. The gloves were off. I wasn't going to let her slither through another round of lies. So I did what she hated most, I went public. That evening, I posted everything in the neighborhood's private online group. The fake letters, the video footage, the mailbox vandalism, even the part where Tom broke under pressure. I wrote it all out calmly like a report. This isn't gossip, I ended it. It's a record. And it stops here. Within minutes, the post exploded. Dozens of comments flooded in. Some people were shocked, others amused, but most were furious at her. One neighbor wrote, "She fined me for painting my shutters 2 shades too dark. I knew she wasn't legit." Another added, "She made us take down our bird feeder. Said it was an avian hazard." Karen tried to comment too, but every response she made was buried in laughing emojis and screenshots of her past rant. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the narrative. I'd taken her weapon, public opinion, and turned it against her. The next day, she came to my door again, but there was no rage this time. Just exhaustion. She looked like someone whose reflection had finally started arguing back. "You think you've humiliated me," she said, voice brittle. "You think this makes you the hero?" I kept my tone even. "No, Karen. I think it makes me done. You don't understand," she said quietly. "If I lose the HOA seat, I lose everything. It's not about control, it's about order. This neighborhood falls apart without someone keeping it clean." I almost pitied her then. Almost. "Karen," I said, "you're confusing order with obedience. Nobody wants to live in fear of you." For a second, her eyes softened, like she might actually hear me. Then she whispered, "You'll regret this," and walked away for what I thought was the last time. That night the van returned. But this time, it wasn't parked across the street, it was in my driveway. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside. The driver's door opened. It wasn't Tom. It wasn't anyone I recognized. A heavy-set man with a camera stepped out, followed by a woman with a microphone. They were from a local news outlet. "Sir, are you the homeowner involved in the HOA dispute?" the reporter asked. I blinked. "What?" We received multiple statements from a local HOA official about alleged harassment, property traps, and unauthorized recordings. "Do you have a comment?" I realized what had happened. Karen had gone public too. She'd taken it to the media. And somehow, she'd spun it so she looked like the victim again. The story aired that night. HOA volunteer claims harassment after mailbox prank escalates. The footage they used was all from her perspective, photos of her soaked, crying, dramatic interviews about living in fear of retaliation. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone in the neighborhood knew who it was. My phone blew up with texts, half sympathy, half shock. Robert called me too. "I'm sorry," he said. "We didn't authorize that interview." She went rogue. "We're calling an emergency HOA vote to remove her permanently." It was the right move, but by then, the damage was done. Online strangers were arguing about me, neighbors were avoiding eye contact again, and I was back to being the villain in someone else's story. Still, I couldn't help but admire her persistence. Karen didn't just play chess, she played propaganda. But this time, I had something she didn't know about. A trump card. When the reporter showed up, my cameras caught everything. Their setup, her feeding them lines from behind the fence, even her coaching them on angles. I edited the footage into a short clip, posted it anonymously in the comments of the news video, and let the internet do what it does best. Within hours, the tone flipped. The top comment read, "Wait, she staged this?" Another said, "Classic HOA Karen moment." The clip went viral locally. By morning, the news station had quietly removed the segment. When I walked outside that day, the van was gone. Karen's blinds were drawn again. A "for sale" sign leaned against her porch, not yet planted but waiting. I didn't know whether to feel relief or disappointment. After months of chaos, the idea of her being gone felt surreal, almost hollow. But then, as I opened my mailbox to grab my morning paper, I found one last note inside. The handwriting was shaky again. "You win this one," it said. "But some of us don't quit. We relocate." I laughed, tired, amused, almost grateful. Maybe she would move, maybe not. But even if she did, somewhere else, another poor neighbor was about to meet their new HOA president. And for once, that thought didn't scare me. It just made me glad I'd learned how to fight back, with patience, proof, and just the right amount of prankster's justice. For a few blissful weeks, the neighborhood felt normal again. Kids rode their bikes in circles around the cul-de-sac, sprinklers clicked in the distance, and nobody whispered "Karen" like it was a curse word anymore. The "for sale" sign eventually went up for real in her yard, the kind with an optimistic, under contract, sticker slapped across it. I'll admit, the sight gave me a guilty pleasure. The balance of the street had shifted, like a weight lifted off its foundation. But peace is a strange thing. When you've lived under siege long enough, calm doesn't feel safe, it feels suspicious. And sure enough, one Saturday morning, that suspicion paid off. A white envelope appeared in my mailbox, no stamp, just a handwritten note that said, "Before I go, I want to say goodbye properly." I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable, angry, looping, like every letter was fighting for dominance over the paper. Inside the envelope was a single key taped to a note that read, "Come see for yourself." No address, just "you'll know where." It felt like bait, and I knew I should have ignored it. But curiosity has always been my fatal flaw. Around noon, I saw her house door ajar. The "for sale" sign was still there, but the windows were open, curtains fluttering in the wind. Against my better judgment, I crossed the street and stepped onto her porch. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The air inside smelled like bleach and cheap perfume, the kind she used to drown herself in before HOA meetings. "Karen," I called out. No answer. I half expected her to jump out with a camera, yelling something about trespassing, but instead I heard faint humming from the kitchen. When I turned the corner, she was standing there, holding a cup of tea like we were old friends catching up after a vacation. "You came," she said softly, almost surprised. Her hair was unkempt, eyes red-rimmed but steady. "I wasn't sure you would." I kept my distance. "You left a key in my mailbox. That's technically still tampering with mail, by the way." She gave a dry laugh. "Still keeping score, I see." Then she gestured toward a box on the counter. "You might want to look at that before I go." I didn't move. "What is it?" "Evidence," she said. "Of everything. The fake letters, the forged signatures, even the news clip script. I recorded it all." I blinked. "Why would you show me this?" She took a long sip of tea before answering. "Because I'm tired. And because you were right. I lost control. It started as about the mail, but really, it was about me. My husband's gone, my committee turned against me, and the only thing I had left was making sure everyone else followed rules I couldn't follow myself." For a moment, she didn't sound like an enemy, she sounded human. "Then why keep pushing?" I asked. She smiled faintly, bitterly. "Because it's easier to be the villain than the failure." The sentence hung in the air. I didn't know whether to feel sympathy or suspicion. I approached the box. Inside were folders labeled with dates, copies of HOA complaints, printouts of emails, even screenshots of neighborhood posts. Every piece of her campaign against me was organized with the precision of an accountant documenting her own crime. And at the bottom was something stranger, a flash drive taped to a note that read, "For when they come after you next." I looked up, confused. "What's on it?" She shook her head. "Insurance. You'll figure it out." Then she said something that made my stomach twist. "You should leave this place too. They'll turn on you next. That's what communities do. They need a villain." I didn't respond. I just stood there, staring at the woman who had made my life miserable for months, now standing in her empty kitchen surrounded by the ghosts of her obsession. She sighed, placed her teacup in the sink, and said, "Good luck, neighbor," before walking past me toward the door. I watched her step into the sunlight and drive away without looking back. I spent the rest of the day debating whether to look at the flash drive. My gut told me it was another trap, but curiosity gnawed at me. That night, I finally plugged it into my laptop. The screen loaded a folder labeled HOA_secrets. Inside were dozens of documents, including one labeled Finances. I opened it and froze. It was an accounting spreadsheet showing thousands of dollars in maintenance funds redirected to personal accounts, including one that matched the HOA treasurer's name. Robert. My calm, golf-obsessed HOA president. My supposed ally. I scrolled further and found email threads between him and contractors. Fake invoices, double charges, all authorized under his signature. Karen hadn't been lying this time. It felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. Suddenly, her paranoia didn't seem entirely delusional, it was just misdirected. I sat there staring at the numbers, wondering what to do. Reporting it would blow up the entire neighborhood. Staying quiet would make me complicit. And worst of all, nobody would believe that the evidence came from Karen of all people. But then I realized something else. Maybe that's why she'd given it to me. She knew no one would take her seriously, but they might take me seriously after everything she'd done. It was her twisted way of passing the torch. The next morning, I printed a few pages from the spreadsheet and went straight to Robert's house. He greeted me with his usual tired smile. "Morning," he said. "Karen finally moving out?" "Yeah," I said. "She left me something interesting." I handed him the papers. He looked at them, his smile fading. "Where did you get these?" "She gave them to me." He exhaled slowly. "You know she's not stable." "Maybe not," I said, "but numbers don't hallucinate." His jaw tightened. "Listen, this is a misunderstanding. HOA finances are complicated." I folded my arms. "Then you won't mind explaining it to the authorities?" He glared at me then, all the charm draining from his face. "You don't want to do that," he said quietly. "It'll make things ugly, for everyone." I left without answering. That evening, a new email arrived from the HOA address. "Urgent. Emergency board meeting tomorrow 6 p.m. I knew what it meant. They wanted to contain it before I could speak. But I wasn't walking into that meeting alone. I printed everything, emails, ledgers, screenshots, and brought them with me in a neat folder labeled Transparency. When I arrived, half the board was already there, whispering nervously. Robert sat at the head of the table, pretending calm. "Let's begin," he said. "We've had some misunderstandings lately." I laid the folder on the table. "You mean embezzlement?" His eyes flicked toward me, sharp. "Careful with your words." I opened the folder and began laying out the evidence page by page. Murmurs rippled through the room. One of the board members, a quiet woman named Denise, gasped. "Robert, these are your accounts." He stammered, "Those are doctored." I slid a printed email forward. "Then explain this one you sent to a contractor last year authorizing a $14,000 landscaping renewal that never happened." The room went silent. Denise whispered, "We should call for a vote." Robert stood up abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned," he snapped. But nobody left. The rest of the board stared at him in disgust. He realized then that the game was over. He tried to gather his papers, but I calmly added, "I've already sent copies to the county records office." He froze. "You can't." "Already did," I said. "And don't worry, I credited Karen for uncovering it. Seems fair." His expression was priceless. Shock, rage, fear, all in one tight grimace. Then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. That night, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Word spread fast. By morning, Robert had resigned for personal reasons. The HOA announced an interim election, and the neighborhood chat exploded with messages of relief. Some people even joked that I should run for president. I didn't reply. The irony of replacing one control freak with another wasn't lost on me. I didn't want authority, I just wanted peace. But peace, again, didn't last long. 2 days later, I got an email from an unknown address. Subject line: "She told you, didn't she?" Inside was a single sentence: "You have no idea what you've started." No name, no attachments. But I knew. It wasn't Robert, it was Karen. Somehow, she'd heard about the fallout. Maybe she was watching from a distance, maybe she still had people in the neighborhood feeding her updates. The email's timestamp was from a nearby town 2 hours away. That was enough to make me realize she hadn't really disappeared. She'd just changed her battlefield. That night, I opened my front door to find a package on the porch. Same style, same neat handwriting. My name. Inside was a small ceramic figurine of a snake, glazed and polished. A note underneath read, "For protection." I stared at it for a long moment before setting it on the shelf near my front door. Because despite everything, despite the madness, the lies, the games, I couldn't help feeling like maybe, just maybe, this was her way of saying thank you. Or maybe it was another warning. With Karen, those two things were often the same. The next morning, a new email from the HOA appeared. "Congratulations on your nomination for HOA president." I laughed out loud. I hadn't agreed to anything. Denise must have put my name forward. The thought of becoming what I'd spent months mocking felt absurd. Still, as I read the email, a weird calm settled over me. Maybe the only way to stop another Karen from rising was to sit in the chair myself, just long enough to rewrite the rules, simplify the power structure, make sure no one ever weaponized mailboxes or sprinklers again. I looked over at the ceramic snake glinting in the sunlight. "Fine," I muttered. "One last game." Because if Karen had taught me anything, it was that the worst monsters in suburbia weren't born. They were elected. The day I officially became HOA president was the strangest of my life. Half the neighborhood showed up to the meeting with cupcakes and congratulations, as if I'd just been elected mayor of some tiny kingdom instead of inheriting the mess left by two tyrants. I smiled, shook hands, pretended it was an honor, but deep down, I knew it wasn't power I wanted. It was control over the chaos that had nearly consumed my peace. As I sat in the chair at the head of the long oak table, I thought about how many times I'd been on the receiving end of that authority, how it felt to have my mailbox, yard, and even my sanity policed by someone who confused rules with righteousness. Now that chair was mine, and I intended to make it mean something else entirely. The first order of business was dismantling Karen's legacy. Her bylaws were a labyrinth of petty micromanagement, 30 pages about fence colors, plant heights, and mailbox maintenance. I shredded most of them and replaced them with a one-page document that began with, "Residents are adults. Use common sense. Respect privacy." The vote passed almost unanimously. For the first time, people clapped at an HOA meeting. But while I tried to act confident, I could feel eyes on me. Some friendly, some curious, and at least one pair that felt almost familiar in its scrutiny. When the meeting ended, I lingered to pack up papers, and that's when Denise, the new treasurer, leaned in and said quietly, "You did the right thing. But you know she's still watching, right?" I stared at her. "Karen?" Denise nodded. "She sent me an email last week. Said she supports the reform movement." I almost laughed. "She called it that?" "She did," Denise said, smiling thinly. "And she asked for the meeting minutes. From the last 3 sessions." I sighed. "Of course she did." "Don't send her anything," I said. "Let her think we're too boring to spy on." Denise hesitated. "What if she actually means well this time?" I shook my head. "Karen doesn't mean well. She means control. Those are different languages." For a few weeks, things went smoothly. The neighborhood actually looked happy again. People were gardening, throwing barbecues, even using each other's driveways without passive-aggressive note. The mail came without incident. The cameras caught nothing but squirrels and Amazon deliveries. Peace, it seemed, was finally sustainable. Then, one evening in late spring, a new family moved into Karen's old house, a young couple named Nate and Lila. They introduced themselves with smiles and fresh-baked cookies, the suburban peace offering. But what caught my eye was the sticker on their moving van, managed by Karen Properties LLC. I froze for a second, smiled back, and told them to let me know if they needed help settling in. Inside, though, I felt a creeping realization. She hadn't really left, she'd just changed her title. Over the next few days, small oddities began appearing. A new HOA suggestion form showed up in the community mailbox, asking for stricter property appearance standards. A fake survey about neighborhood improvement initiatives circulated anonymously through email. Then a post appeared in the community chat group under the username Orderly Neighbor. It praised the new president's dedication to restoring discipline. The phrasing was too familiar, polished, passive-aggressive, laced with control. I knew that voice. Karen was back, whispering through proxies. I didn't confront Nate or Lila right away. Instead, I started paying attention. They kept their lawn perfectly trimmed, too perfectly, Karen-style symmetrical. Their mailbox was the same model she'd once forced the neighborhood to adopt. And one morning, I caught sight of a ceramic snake sitting on their porch railing, identical to the one she'd sent me. That was when the truth settled in. She'd sold them the house, but she hadn't sold her influence. She'd turned them into her mouthpieces. Whether they knew it or not, they were continuing her work. I decided to test my theory. I announced a small community appreciation cookout and invited everyone to bring something homemade. It wasn't about food, it was about seeing who aligned with whom. Nate and Lila arrived early, cheerful, armed with a clipboard for sign-ups. When I asked what it was for, they smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Karen thought we could keep things organized." The name slipped out so casually I almost admired the boldness. Karen thought. I repeated. Lila blinked, realizing the slip. She just gave us some tips before we moved in. You know, to keep the neighborhood standard up. I smiled tightly. Of course. Throughout the afternoon, I watched them mingle, collecting feedback from residents about HOA improvements. When I finally peeked at their clipboard, half the signatures were real, but the comments were written in Karen's unmistakable cursive. Residents desire clearer structure. Too many unmonitored cameras. Need to restore decorum at meetings. The phrasing was her manifesto in disguise. I took a photo of the sheet and slipped it back before anyone noticed. Later that evening, I printed the image and pinned it next to the HOA bulletin board with a handwritten note. Anonymous feedback should remain anonymous. Duplicating past mistakes isn't welcome here. The message was subtle but sharp. By morning, the sheet was gone, but I knew who'd taken it. 2 days later, I received a call from a blocked number. When I answered, there was silence for a few seconds, then her voice, calm and eerily composed. "You're doing better than I expected," Karen said. "I almost admire it." "Almost," I replied. "Well," she said, "I can't say I approve of your relaxed standards. The neighborhood's lost its edge." "You mean your dictatorship?" I asked. She chuckled softly. "Order and dictatorship are separated by results, dear. And from what I hear, there's already trash left out past collection day." I laughed. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" "You'll understand someday," she said. "They love you now, but wait until you make a decision they don't like. You'll see how quickly peace becomes chaos. You'll become what you hated." The line clicked dead before I could reply. Her words lingered like poison, and I hated that they made sense, because a few weeks later they came true. It started with something small. A resident named Colleen parked her camper in her driveway for 2 days, which technically wasn't against the new simplified rules. But a neighbor complained, saying it lowered property aesthetics. I told them politely that the rules didn't restrict short-term parking. The next day, 3 more neighbors emailed me similar complaints. Then a group chat formed called Community Standards Watch. The irony was painful. They wanted rules, boundaries, restrictions, the same things I'd fought to escape. I realized then that Karen hadn't created the HOA monster, she'd just learned how to ride it. It had always been there, hidden behind smiles and hedges, waiting for someone to feed it structure again. So I compromised. I drafted one new rule, just one. No extended storage of vehicles exceeding 7 feet in height. It felt harmless, practical. Everyone voted yes. But within a week, there were new complaints about yard decorations, recycling bins, and fence colors. I'd opened the door, and now they wanted more. I caught myself rewriting sentences late at night, adding clauses, clarifying conditions, exactly like Karen used to do. One evening, while updating the HOA website, I realized I'd spent 20 minutes drafting a regulation about acceptable mailbox dimensions. My own mailbox, the one this whole war had started over. I sat back, staring at the glowing screen, and whispered, "Oh no," because she'd been right. The cycle wasn't broken, it was just wearing a new face. My face. I spent the next day walking the neighborhood, trying to see it through fresh eyes. The fences, the lawns, the mailboxes, they were perfect, but empty. Nobody waved anymore. Everyone was too busy looking for what didn't fit. Even the kids seemed quieter. The air of tension that had vanished with Karen's departure was slowly creeping back, and I realized the truth. It wasn't Karen haunting this place, it was the HOA itself. The system rewarded control, and whoever sat in that chair eventually became her. That night, I wrote my resignation letter. Effective immediately, it began. A community should be built on trust, not enforcement. I slipped it under Denise's door, took one last look at the quiet street, and felt a strange mixture of relief and defeat. As I turned to head home, I noticed something glinting near my mailbox. A new note. My name written neatly. Inside was a simple message, "Told you so. K." I laughed out loud, a sound halfway between exhaustion and disbelief. Then I picked up the ceramic snake from my porch, turned it over in my hands, and placed it gently inside the mailbox where it all began. For once, it wasn't bait, it was closure. The next morning, I packed up my tools, took down the cameras, and drove away from that perfect little cul-de-sac. As I looked in the rearview mirror, the row of matching mailboxes stretched behind me like a line of identical soldiers, each one a monument to rules, pride, and paranoia. I wondered if someday Karen would come back, or if someone new would rise to take her place. But either way, I knew the truth now. In neighborhoods like ours, there's always another Karen waiting, sometimes across the street, sometimes in the mirror. And as the road opened up ahead, I couldn't help but smile at the thought that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally escaped the war I'd accidentally won.